West Indies Cricket, Caribbean Cricket Podcast. West Indies Cricket, Caribbean Cricket Podcast.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another special edition of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. I'm one half of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, Machel St. Patrick Hewitt, and with me as ever is my Guyanese partner in crime, Santokie Nagulendran. And Santokie, I've got to give you the Guyana shout out, not because Guyana may well go on to win what is their 6th regional title in a row, but because we're returning to the land of Guyana to do another kind of Guyana cricket special, looking at who is the greatest Guyanese cricketer of all time. And just before we press record, Santokie, we're having a discussion with our guests saying, what's our criteria? Because I think criteria is important here, because we already know what's going to happen. This will probably get put in loads of different Guyanese group chats. It's going to cause loads of debate. And actually, Santokie, I'm going to remind you of something. Do you remember back in the early days of...
I know what you're going to say.
Do you remember back in the early days of Caribbean Cricket Podcast, and you put in a Facebook group a kind of like ode to Ramnaresh Sarwan, and you said, I can't remember, you'll remember it better than me, but you said something like Ramnaresh Sarwan was a world-class player, and loads of Guyanese came back in the comments going, how dare you, Sarwan underachieved, he never achieved nothing, how could you say he's a world-class player? And with that, I never saw you on Facebook again after that.
I had to delete my account after that. So, Mash, I'm looking forward to this one. You know, it's going to be a hot topic of debate. I know across Guyana, man are going to have their dal, pumpkin, and rice ready, watching this, getting ready to cuss out or agree with what we say. We're here to, you talk about the greatest Guyanese cricketer in Test cricket. I think that's clear. Kind of note down. Test cricket, we're going to look at the legacy from 1928. Maurice Fernandez, the first Guyanese to play for West Indies, all the way through to, Tevin Imlak again in Pakistan a few months ago. We're going to look at that period, 97 years. Who has been the greatest to do it for the great country of Guyana in Test cricket for West Indies? And Mash, there's only one person, not even just Guyanese cricket in history, general cricket in history, but specifically Guyana. There's only one guest we can get on. He's been on the show previously to do our Guyana history special. So without further ado, let's welcome on Basil Butcher Jr. to the show.
Indeed. Yes, Basil, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you guys for having me. This is a great topic. I must say, in New York, or when we play cricket in the summer, this was in the past years, we in the park. These are the kind of debates that are always going on. This is like water off duck's back. We have always. It would seem like every week we have a debate. Who is the all-time Guyana team? If we're Mount Guyanese, or we will have a debate the all-time West Indies teams. These are ongoing debates. They're great. They're great theater because you can never prove it, but it's great for the discussion. And one of the things about it allows you to delve into the history of West Indies cricket, which is rich and fun to discuss. Yeah.
Let me. You know what? Before we get into it, Mash, let me make a point. So if you ask anyone to name their top 10 Guyanese cricketers or top 5 Guyanese cricketers, most people aren't going to name anybody this millennium. Maybe Ramnaresh Sarwan because he made his debut in 2000. So Basil, the fact that nobody comes to mind in at least the last 20 years for Guyana, for West Indies, does this just reflect more so than anything the state of our game? The fact that we've got so many names historically, but in the last 20 years, we're struggling to name anyone out here.
Yeah, I think it is a reflection of where West Indies cricket as a whole is, the slide that has occurred, that we, those names that when you talk to the older generations, you see a twinkle in their eye and a spark in their voice as they talk about those players in the way not only they impacted on the field, but just the society as a whole, the region with their performances. We don't have those kind of players for the most part in the last 20 years. Probably the only guy is probably Brian Lara. He's the only.
Oh wait, sorry, I forgot. I know, Basil. I know in your top 5 list you've got Shimon Hetmeyer, so obviously that's an exception.
I like Hetmeyer, but he can't be in that list.
So listen, let me let me just give people the context as well, because the title for the thumbnail that people will see when they click on this video will say, is Shivnarine Chanderpaul the greatest? So I just want to set the context for this, because some people see that thumbnail and immediately go to the comments and start cussing. So I explain to people why the title says that.
Right.
And I'm going to put this to both of you, obviously. And obviously, people watching Basil and Santokie are of Guyanese extract. So I'm presenting the neutral, non-Guyanese view here. And here's the joke, guys, because two of my favorite cricketers of all time are Carl Hooper and Shivnarine Chanderpaul. So I've got two Guyanese in my top 5 in terms of West Indies cricketers. But the premise where this started was, I always look back at Shiv's career, and I always think that of all of the great run getters in West Indies cricket, in spite of Shiv ending with 11,000 plus and being the second top run scorer, most people, when you mention his name, say something negative before they say something positive. And I just find that really, really interesting, that we can have a guy in West Indies cricket that ended with an average over 50, accumulated 11,000 plus runs, and you have to struggle to find people who will immediately go, he was one of our greats. And we can come back round to Shiv later on in the comments. I just wanted to explain the context of people and why I've put, if any other Guyanese had hit as many runs as Shiv, I don't think we'd be talking, or I don't think we'd be demeaning the status of that. If Kanhai had hit the same number of runs as Shiv, if Kallicharan had hit the same number, if Clive Lloyd had done that, people wouldn't be rushing to say, well. So I just want to unpick this in the course of this episode. But gentlemen, before we get into that, let me just put something on the screen for you, because this is a common image we've seen through Facebook groups in the past. So I'm going to put this to both of you, Santokie and Basil. And Santokie, you can go first. When you think of a Guyanese 11, let me take this off the bottom of the screen so people can see. They should know the pictures, but just in case the youngsters don't know who the people are. when you think of a Guyanese 11, so arguably what I'm saying is these are the 11 we're picking from if we're talking about who's Guyana's greatest. Is there anyone for both of you where you're like, but what about this guy? Is there anyone who immediately think, well, there's an argument to say such and such should be there? Or is this the top 11?
I think this list is based on the performances of Guyanese who played for the West Indies. That's what this is from. And yes, this is the correct 11.
Yeah. Santokie?
Yeah, I would say this is the correct 11. If you're looking at consistency, longevity, sort of talent, performance, I don't think there's many arguments. I mean, there's some on the fringes, like a Joe Solomon, for instance, but I think generally this would be the 11 you'd go for.
So if we are agreed that this is the 11 greatest Guyanese West Indians who have represented the West Indies, I don't even know how we want to. In fact, no, Santokie, I think we go to you, because what's the criteria we're using? Because I think it's also important to say to people, because some people will immediately look at Clive Lloyd and go, well, it's got to be Clive Lloyd because he's the captain of the greatest teams, right? So what's the criteria we're going to go with it?
Yeah, I mean, there's different strands you can go with. So obviously, if you were basing it on statistical performances, Chanderpaul scored the most runs by a Guyanese, second highest in West Indian cricket history, almost 12,000. Played the most amount of tests by West Indian cricket. Also, by stats, you could say Chanderpaul. Clive Lloyd, however, if you're taking into account the captaincy, the legacy he built for West Indies cricket, without Clive Lloyd, do we have this great invincible team that kind of forges the golden generation? And then you've even got Rohan Kanhai, who statistically, good statistics, but he played less than 100 tests. However, his influence on the game, Sunil Gavaskar named his first son Rohan. Bob Marley named his first son Rohan because of the influence and impact Rohan Kanhai had on them culturally as well. So there's various different strands, and I think, Mash, it's only right we combine them all to kind of look at who overall do we think would be the greatest Guyanese test cricketer.
And then I would add also Lance Gibbs also had the world record at one time for the most wickets ever. So,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So Basil, let me come to you first, because I think this is good because I think we're all slyly representing different, between myself and Santokie, we'll say slightly different generations of West Indian cricket sport. Santokie can count as the youngest here. But we can say that
this is a real uncle. This is a real uncle show
yeah.
if I'm the youngest one.
So we'll say we're representing 3 different generations.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll start with you, Basil. When you think Guyanese, the best Guyanese cricketer, and obviously your father's on there, but who immediately comes into your mind when you study the annals of the cricket and the cultural impact when you're having your cricket club chats? Who do you call? Whose name do you call?
Yeah, in my view, the greatest Guyanese cricketer is Clive Lloyd. I don't hesitate at all, because not only he was a tremendous batter for both Guyana and the West Indies, but also his clear impact as the captain of the all-conquering West Indies team that became known as the greatest team sports, dominated the game longer than any team ever. So for that legacy, I give Clive Lloyd the kudos as the greatest cricketer Guyana that came out of Guyana.
If he wasn't captain of the West Indies team, would you still be saying the same, or do you say it's because of...
No, if he wasn't captain, I would say Kanhai.
You have to explain it. Explain why would you say Kanhai?
In my view, this is my opinion, Kanhai is the greatest batsman Guyana has ever produced. Regardless of the stats or whatever. Obviously, he didn't play as much as Chanderpaul, but he was the greatest batter that we've produced. I mean, his style, his flair, his skill, and all of those things, he was the greatest batter. And put Kanhai in context, because he doesn't have the 50 average, so people like to say, Kanhai this. But there was a period of time where the great Sobers and Kanhai in the early part of the 60s, Kanhai was outscoring Sobers. And to do that shows you the quality of player that he was. The thing with Kanhai was Viv Richards before Viv Richards. He was an entertainer, right? And he would oftentimes, as my father would say, Rohan would look to try to play the impossible shot and end up getting himself out. Because think about it, I think he has like about 6 or 7 90s. Now, just think if he was one of those guys that was so conscious about getting to the 100, and let's say he converted 6 of those 90s into 100s, he would have had 21 centuries in 79 tests. Now, flip that to Viv. Viv played 120 something and has 24 centuries. So that kind of puts you to understand how great a player Kanhai was. And I think he doesn't get his just due for the mere fact because he did not average 50, in my view.
Yeah. Let me expand. Yeah, let me expand on. I agree completely with what Basil said. I think Rohan Kanhai, obviously I didn't ever see him play live, but if you look at it, CLR James said Rohan Kanhai was the first ever truly West Indian batter in terms of his style and his determination to entertain. His autobiography was called Blasting for Runs. He said every ball he was looking to try and get a 4 or 6 if possible. He saw cricket as a way to entertain the fans, and sort of the influence he had, he was called the original master blaster. So that sort of legacy. And I think going back, Mash, I think that's why your original point about Chanderpaul not getting enough credit is because Chanderpaul is essentially the opposite of what we've expected from West Indian cricket. He's very introverted. Yes. His style of play isn't to entertain. His style of play was to survive and value each run. And that goes against the history of sort of traditional West Indian batters we've had from the 3 Ws through to, Clive Lloyd, Rohan Kanhai with Richard. So I think that's firstly why Chanderpaul doesn't get enough credit because of how he plays. Distinctly a very defensive way of playing. But I think Rohan Kanhai, his legacy in terms of cultural legacy and the way he's influenced other players to go on and the style of play that he was one of the first to do it in the West Indies setup means he's definitely got to be up there. Obviously, bonus point for me and Basil because he was from Berbice. So But Mash, Let me go to you because obviously you're the non-Guyanese in this conversation. We've had Basil say Clive Lloyd is the greatest. I know that your personal favorite player of all time is Carl Hooper. But what would you say he was the greatest, or do you have a different opinion on that?
So I'm gonna, before I answer that, I just want to check something about Kanhai from both of you to answer here. Do you think Kanhai suffers in comparison because when the West Indies became the world beaters, he was at the tail end of his career? And do you think that impacts on on why he's not in some of those higher echelon conversations? Because the dominance period that goes on from the early to 70s, 80s until the mid 90s, he's not part of that. Basil, over to you. Do you think that affects how people view him?
No, I think what affects him is because he played in the shadow of Garfield Sobers.
Okay.
That's what is the fact, right? It was him and Sobers were the two top batters for the 60s for the West Indies. But Sobers is the one that people just still talk about, and they forgot that Kanhai was right there with him, right? So that is the reason why Kanhai is overshadowed like that, because of Sir Garfield Sobers. Yeah.
Okay.
And let's just add as well, to add to this, Clive Lloyd and Rowan Kanhai were the two top scorers. Clive Lloyd with a century, Rowan Kanhai with a half century in the 1975
first World Cup. Yes,
first World Cup, which obviously a landmark event for West Indies as well.
Because it's interesting. He was not actually chosen. It was Sobers, but because Sobers' knees would not allow him to play, he had to redraw, and Kanhai came in as the replacement. And those of us who were alive remember that 50 that he made in the final against Australia. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna give you my answer, and then I'm gonna pivot back because I'm surprised both of you left someone out here. But I'll pivot back to that point in a minute. So as you correctly point out, Santokie, and Basil knows this already, I think people think I'm trolling when I say it, but I'm still serious to this day. I maintain that the most fluid West Indian batter I've ever seen, live or on TV, is still Carl Hooper to this day. Better than Lara. And I know that's sacrilege. I know some people, but Lara himself has admitted that Hooper, he couldn't believe some of the things that Carl Hooper could do, right? So Hooper, to me, stylistically, and Basil was on a show with me about 2 years ago when Basil said that Hooper couldn't lace Lawrence Rowe's boots. But for me, Hooper stylistically is the best player on that list. Obviously, I didn't see everyone, but that's how highly I rate Carl Hooper. But even that's a personal favorite of mine. And I think sometimes people underrate Carl Hooper's fielding ability, his all-round skills. I think people just always tend to put him in this pigeonhole of underachieved with the bat, forgetting that he was actually a triple threat player. Brilliant in the slips. Absolutely brilliant. And a more than useful all-rounder. But my player is still Shiv. And I think it's important, Santokie, that you raise that point about Shiv and his style of batting. And I think the thing that I think I want us all to address with Shiv, and the question I'm going to put to both of you, when West Indies started to decline, you can all decide when the decline came, but when we really started to decline after Lara goes in 2007, pretty much there's an argument to say from about 2007 to when Shiv retires in 2014, Shiv averages about 70 in that period of time. I have to go back and double check my stats, but I think Shiv averaged about 70 from 2007 to 2014. And there were so many innings we batted where Shiv basically was batting on his own and saving us from absolute embarrassment. But I distinctly remember that at that time, people used to call him selfish because he was batting 5 and 6 and was batting with the tail. And people would say he's batting for the not out. And because we were so weak, he should have gone up the order and should have batted at 3 and 4. And what I'm putting to both of you is that what works against Shiv? More so than his style of batting? Was it the fact that when we were at our lowest ebb and clearly on a long decline, our best batter didn't take the best batting position to lead us out of the mire? That's one way of looking at it. I've always chosen to look at it the other way, which is that this guy averaged 70 for 7 years whilst batting with the weakest team in Test cricket. And I watched him save us from embarrassment. So I always prefer to look at it in that sense. Basil, where do you stand on that line of argument?
I mean, those are fair points in regards to people talk about Shiv, because I even heard Rahul Dravid said he should be batting up at 3. He's the best batter in the team, and Shiv refused to go up the order. So part of the deal, when we look at great West Indian batters, we often look at the guys who walked out for the fight up the order, and that's our worldview in terms of our great batters. Not a guy who's going to say, nah, I'm going to stay at 5 and stay there, and so on and so forth. But I just wanted to add something to what you said about Carl Hooper. I have a friend, I was Lara, and he and another friend, all of us, we go travel down. They too were the Hooper guys, right? So we'd always have the argument of who were the better player. And we were at DCC one afternoon after the West Indies had played. My dad was there with Clive Lloyd and some other guys, because Clive was their manager, and he invited my dad and them to come to have a drink after the Test match. So my friend knew my dad. He went up to my dad to hear an opinion on Hooper. And he asked him about Hooper. And my father said to him, in his opinion, Carl Hooper is the most technically equipped batsman he has ever seen. But the runs don't match up, right? So when Lara writes in his book that he felt Hooper was more talented than him and Tendulkar, Lara has company that agrees with him, right? In my view, if Carl Hooper had scored the runs in the way he scored them after he came back from his retirement, we would be talking about Carl Hooper as an all-time great.
That's a good point you've made there, because I think Hooper, I often use that stat, Basil. When he came back and captained the West Indies Test side, he averaged something like 48, 49. It was something in the high 40s.
Yeah.
And if he had done that for his whole career, batting the way he actually was able to bat, I think we'd be having a serious
conversation. Yes.
Yeah, 100%. Santokie, I'm going to bring something up here. You and Basil both went for Rowan Kanhai, and you both spoke about the way he played. But when I look at videos from the past and I watch some of the innings that Kallicharan played, I'm like, well, this Kallicharan guy was super talented as well. Now, there's the obvious thing that we can't ignore. If he doesn't do the South Africa thing, is Kallicharan higher in the conversation? Yes or no? Because I watched some of his innings from the 70s and go, nah, this guy was a serious batter. But are people unwilling to accept or admit that because of South Africa?
I think, well, Kallicharan obviously came in a period of the great generation, batted at 4 or 5 middle order. He was a very, very good batter. I just don't think he was on the same, stylistically or technically, on the same level as a Rowan Kanhai or a Clive Lloyd or a Viv Richards. So for me, Alvin Kallicharan, I think obviously there is always going to be an asterisk next to his name because he played in South Africa, but I don't think it's tarnished his legacy in the same way it has like a Lawrence Rowe, for instance. I think it's just merely he's on that second level underneath the sort of great players. So I don't think it's a disservice to Alvin Kallicharan. I think people recognize him as a good batter. I just don't think they see him as an all-time great as you would with some of the other batters in this discussion. But I'll hand over to Basil to see if he agrees.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment too, that Alvin is the just below the tier of the. Alvin is in the group with like my dad and those guys. That's the group that he's in. He's not in the conversation with the Vivs and the Sobers and the Laras, etc. He's in the next tier. And that's not taking anything away from him. Alvin was a tremendous player. He's a tremendous player. I mean, he was a player who was very competent against both spin and pace. Something people like to say, he was the most complete batter we had. And I would have to stop and say, hold on. Y'all forget about Rowan Kanhai. People forget Rowan Kanhai played spin at the highest levels, right? He wasn't So I have to often remind people of that about Kanhai because they often forget. And another thing in terms of Kanhai, in the dawning of his career, both him and Sobers in Australia scored hundreds against a young, rampaging Dennis Lilly without a helmet, right? And my cousin Roland Butcher went on a tour with Kanhai sometime in the 80s. Kanhai must have been in his 40s at the time, to Pakistan. And they played games against a virtual Pakistan test team, a lot of players who would play test cricket. And at that time, there was a guy named Iqbal Qasim, was rated as one of the best spinners in the world at the time. And Roland has told me what he saw Kanhai do to Iqbal Qasim. At that age, he said that guy had to be a hell of a player. This was a guy who was at that time one of the best in the world. And Kanhai, almost 10 years retired, put the business on Iqbal Qasim. And so Kanhai was Kanhai, and I've heard guys in Jamaica, because you remember he spent several years coaching in Jamaica, and they say they've seen Kanhai in the nets without pads on, facing up to some of their fast bowlers and playing them with ease. And those guys said he might be a serious player, that at his age doing those kinds of things. So me, I was too young to remember. But my memories of seeing Kanhai when he played at Border are all about the elegance and the beauty how he stroked the ball.
Speaking of, I'll put this one to Basil. Speaking of, players handling tough bowling lineups, Roy Fredericks, Mr. Roy Fredericks on the list as an opener, hit 169, I think, at the Wacker against Thompson and Lilly.
Oh, yes.
What's your opinion on Fredericks? Do you think he falls in that same category as Kallicharan?
Fredericks, Fredericks is an opener. And I'll tell you this, as you guys are talking about underrated or players who don't get their due, Roy Fredericks is probably one of them. Not probably, one of them. Let me just put Roy Fredericks in context. Back when he was playing my father, those eras, when you scored 4,000 test runs, that was a big, big deal. When Roy Fredericks got to 4,000 test runs, there were only 3 other West Indian players who had ever scored 4,000 test runs in their career: Sobers, Kanhai, and Clive Lloyd. So just to put in context what the kind of player Roy Fredericks was, and think about this, he was similar to Conrad Hunt. He had multiple partners throughout his career. He was not blessed like Desmond Haynes and Greenwich, where you had this solid pair that played forever. It was like, it used to be Hunt and somebody, and similar with Fredo. It was Fredo and somebody, right?
Basil, just pause there for a sec, because it's interesting to me, because I think I saw you put something in the group chat about this a while back. Because whenever people talk about, I know we're talking about Guyana specifically, but whenever people talk about the greatest West Indian openers of all time, Test, the only names you hear are Haynes, Greenwich, Chris Gell. You never really hear Fredericks come into the conversation, but when you look at the numbers, it's comparable.
Exactly. And look, Andy Roberts rates Fredericks higher than those other guys. Right? He has a real soft spot for Fredo. And
is it because, though, sorry, just come back in. Is it because, does Fredericks suffer from, obviously, Greenwich and Haynes have the premium of being the partnership. Yes. Gale has the premium of being a one-in-a-kind player. So Fredericks has no X factor, if you see what I mean. He's not. He doesn't have the star power that would make his name be called.
And then too, to show you the kind of player Fredo was, he was known as a swashbuckling player, right? They say that Fredo couldn't play spin. He, on his one tour to India, he scores 2 centuries, right? They say also he's a swashbuckling player. He played an innings in England where he opened and he was the last guy out. So he showed the versatility as an opening batsman in all conditions against all types of bowling. Because as you said, he didn't have the benefit of playing with an opening, so you would remember this opening pair. It's those of us who looked at the game and remember what Fredo did as a batter. Kudos to him. Just like you would look at Conrad Hunt. And when you look at their numbers, you're like, yeah, these guys got to be in the conversation. And I know I'm again too. My dad said Fredo was as good as any one of them, and he's talking about the Hunts, the Greenwiches, etc.
So that covers Fredericks. We still haven't gone to the great Basil Butcher himself, but we haven't spoken about bowlers. And here's the thing now. When we talk about great West Indian bowlers, we won't go to Lance just yet for spin. I'm going to read some numbers to you. Curtly Ambrose took his test wickets at 21. Joel Garner took his test wickets at 21. Malcolm Marshall took his test wickets at 21. The next person I've got on my list, I could be missing someone, and apologies if I am missing someone. The next person I've got on my list is Colin Croft, who took his wickets at 23. But when we talk about, and it's similar to the Kallicharan argument, when we talk about greatest West Indian bowlers of all time, yes, there's the iconic picture with Croft in it. But you don't really hear people mention Croft's name. If you said to people, give me the top 5 West Indian bowlers you've seen, I'm not sure Croft's name enters most people's lists. But when you look at the raw statistics and the reputation he had when he was obviously, but prior to going to South Africa, people will say he was one of the most fearsome bowlers that the West Indies. I've missed out Hall, I just realized. But people will say he's one of the most fearsome bowlers that West Indies ever produced. So, gentlemen, you said the asterisk doesn't count, doesn't really matter for Kallicharan. Do you think it matters for Croft?
Let me read something. I want to read something written by Croft, because the big Colin Croft often would write about himself and his stats, right? And when Ian Chappell made that comment that the New Zealand four-seam attack was the best in the world, well, Croft wrote a retort about that, right? And in that retort, he spoke of himself, right? He said, he said, I was rated the #1 bowler of the world for most of the 5 to 6 years that I played for the West Indies. Very true. I have the ICC awards to prove that. He then goes on to say, in West Indies cricket, I am the #7 bowler overall in a total cricket history. Ambrose, 912 points. Marshall, 910. Wesall, 898. Gibbs, 897. Andy Roberts, 891. Garner, 890. Colin Croft, 887. Right? He said, he goes on to say, well, I'm going to leave the rest out. But pretty much, Croft is not remembered mostly. I don't think it's in South Africa. His career was short.
Yeah,
he had
I was going to say it's the injuries.
20-something test matches, right? And that's it. And if you saw Colin Croft bowl, you would know he would not have lasted, because his action put a lot of strain on his back. But the guy was indeed a phenomenal bowler. He wasn't a phenomenal bowler that, I remember one guy made a comment one time, because, Croft is somebody that speaks his mind, and often in a personal way sometimes, and rub people the wrong way. And Crawford made a comment, I forgot what it was. I think it was about saying that Gale should retire from testing or something. And a friend of mine made this comment, oh, there goes Crawford again. If I call 8 fast bowlers in West Indies history, his name is not there. So I asked him, name the 8 for me, please. Up to this day, he has never named them, because you cannot call 8 West Indian fast bowlers, or the top fast bowlers that have played for West Indies, and not include Colin Croft.
So my argument, Santokie, I'm going to come to you next. My argument is that if you picked an all-pace attack from the whole history of West Indies, I think Croft's in the team. There's an argument to say Croft. Obviously, some people say, no, Mash, that's not right. And I'm sure people get in the comments below. But if you're talking about based on pure statistical numbers, there's an argument that Croft
Croft has to be in the conversation. I agree with you.
Yeah, I think Croft is in the conversation. I think it was Port of Spain. He took 8 for 29 against Pakistan.
Correct. Yeah.
And people will call that as one of the great spells in West Indian cricket in history. But I think, as Basil said, it's just purely he didn't play enough tests. We didn't get enough of a sample size compared to other great bowlers to say, all right, he's in that top rung of bowlers. And he was also unfortunate enough to be around in a period when we had one of the greatest pace attacks in the history of cricket. So in any other era or generation, Croft would be the number one guy, your go-to guy. Unfortunately, in the era he was in, he was 5th or 6th choice a lot of the time. So I think a lot of factors play a part in that. But Croft definitely should be in the conversation. It's just unfortunate we didn't get to see more of him. I would say the South African thing, I don't think it plays a massive part. But there was that story about him, which is famous, about him getting removed from a train in South Africa.
Yeah.
And I think that's always, because that anecdote has always stuck to his name, it does also play a part in kind of how he's been looked at retrospectively, as we've kind of seen there. So I don't think it's affected him in the same way as it has a lot of other players there, but it still has had an impact in terms of tarnishing his name.
The last, I mean, we should obviously reference the one spinner. Well, no, sorry, with no disrespect to Carl Hooper, but we should reference the main spinner in the squad, Lance Gibbs, almost the forerunner of. I know obviously everyone talked about Ramadan and Valentine, but for me, Lance Gibbs is the forerunner of spin bowling in the region. Who knows? Maybe Gudakesh Multi will supplant him one day.
But you know what? I was going to say before we get into Lance Gibbs, if you look at, so Rion King's played 19 tests, but Rion King's in this list. Technically, it's unfortunate someone like a Veersamy Permaul who's taken 574.
Yeah, hold on. Good point.
Because technically, he would be one of Guyana's greatest players in terms of his sheer numbers at a regional level. But because for various reasons, he's not had a consistent run in the test side, he's not in the list. But technically, someone like a Permaul, I'm sure there's others as well, will be great products of the Guyanese system, just not in the test arena.
I often say when we used to have these arguments, debates about all-time Guyana team, for example, my criteria is this: what you did for Guyana, not what you did for the West Indies. So in such a conversation, Permaul would be somebody who would be a candidate to be an all-time team, because it's an all-time Guyana team. So it's your performances for Guyana, right? And then you would set a standard in terms of you have to play X number of games, because longevity plays a role in being an all-time player too, right? You have to perform over a period of time. So that's always been my argument. Now, I mean, this list here was based on Guyanese who played for the West Indies, and these were the top performers from Guyanese who played for the West Indies. So that's all this was. This is not a real all-time Guyana.
Before we get on to Lance Gibbs, then, Basil, off the top of my head, where would you put someone like a Leon Johnson in
I was thinking that as well,
because obviously he's captained them to an unprecedented.
Yeah, but Leon only would get recognition as a captain. His batting, his performances as a batter, he can't even sniff this group.
And Mash, where do you stand on it then? Because is it a case of, for you, does a regional player have to have had a successful or notable period in the West Indies side, because that's the pinnacle of cricket in the region, or would you also take into account their performances if they are like a Permaul or like a Rakeem Cornwall, or someone who's sort of done it at a regional level but just not had the opportunities to get into the test side?
I think Permaul deserves to be mentioned. But if this team is only going to have one frontline spinner, then it has to be Lance Gibbs, because I think the premium of the records he set and his cultural importance in terms of Guyanese footsteps in the West Indies team and world cricket means he's got to be there. But it's almost like we have to put Permaul 12th man in recognition of what he's done at the domestic level and the records that he's created domestically. But the reason why I'm nervous to start using the domestic argument is because once you start talking domestic, you're going to get a few men who start to say, well, Hetmeyer should be in the team. And
I don't have the runs for Guyana. He don't have the runs for Guyana.
I might have to take Fredericks out for a Chandrika, you know.
Basil, just speak on, because there'll be a lot of people who watch this who will never have seen Gibbs play or have studied the history to understand the cultural legacy and importance of a Lance Gibbs. So just speak on Lance.
Look, he was a great bowler, and he could out people in any condition. It didn't matter where he could get batters out, right? He was a match winner, you know. So those are the things that why he and just to think about it, as a spinner, to get 300 wickets in the time that he played, it was a tremendous feat, because there was only one other person ever in the history of cricket had gotten 300 test wickets, was Freddie Truman, right? And then Gibbs came and broke his record. So that puts it in context that, you know, there was just one other player that ever took 300 wickets, and then he became the second guy. You know, but when you look at Gibbs, he has no peer in terms of the West Indies. And, you know, some of the guys who have come today, the game has changed and so on and so forth with some of the rules. And, you know, then when you add DRS, some would wonder Gibbs played when there was DRS, how many more wickets he might have gotten, and so on and so forth. So, taking all that stuff out, just put in context, there was only one other player in the history of the game, and Test cricket was around for close to 100 years when Gibbs became the second guy to take 300 Test wickets. So that alone should tell you the kind of legacy that he. And unfortunately, because of Gibbs' greatness, West Indies cricket, I would say, has had this habit of thinking that every new spinner we bring on is going to be the next Lance Gibbs. And if they don't strike early, we discard them and move to the next, right? And even if you look at Gibbs's career, when he started out, he didn't come out of the gates firing, you know. And actually at times he wasn't getting to play as regularly when Jerry Alexander was the captain, because it was said Jerry Alexander could not keep the Gibbs. Right? Gibbs' bounce and turn was a little bit too much for him. So he tried to keep Gibbs out of the team as much as he can, you know, until, you know, Gibbs became a real regular when Worrell took over, and the rest is history.
Yeah. I think part of the reason why, you know, Gibbs doesn't immediately come to people's attention when they're talking about greatness is purely because cricket and fans, we tend to overlook spinners. It's not as glamorous as pace bowling. People remember the pace bowling, whereas Gibbs is someone who was consistent over a long period of time. And he's also unlucky as well, because in hindsight, when people talk about West Indian spinners, but it's because of Ramdin and Valentine and what they did at Lord's in 1950, that always gets seen as the go-to as the West Indian spinners. Whereas Gibbs was sort of under the radar. He was consistent and he'd done a job, but he would never steal the headlines. And I think that's sort of why Gibbs doesn't come to mind. But if you think about his achievements, first spinner to get to 300 wickets, that shows his consistency, stamina, because we saw Ramdin, he burnt out pretty quickly in the 1950s, whereas Gibbs kept going on, his stamina, endurance, ability to adapt to situations. So I think Gibbs definitely in the conversation as one of the greats for Guyana.
And I must add, he was a tremendous gully fielder.
Well, do you know what's interesting here? I'm just looking through this list, and you've got Fredericks is a World Cup winner, Kanhai's a World Cup winner, Kallicharan's a World Cup winner, Lloyd, obviously, Croft's a World Cup winner, Gibbs is a World Cup winner. This is a serious team here. Cole Hooper, did he win that Champions Trophy? We got a Champions Trophy in there. Was he in that Champions Trophy? I think Sarwan was in the Champions Trophy, and Shiv would have been in the Champions Trophy team in 2004. So there's some serious global title medals in amongst this group. But gentlemen, this is where I want to draw this one to a close by asking you this question. assuming that we agree, and we did at the top of the show, agreed that this is the best 11 that have played for the West Guyanese cricketers who have played for West Indies. How many of these and who would make an all-time West Indies team? Because that's the truth. I already know who you're going to say is the greatest, but now here's my next litmus test. Of this list, if you were then to put together the greatest West Indies team of all time, who on this list makes it, if anyone? And here's the thing. My answer is only Shiv makes it. How about that?
The only one that makes it for me is Lance Gibbs.
Hold on, Basil. No. Wait, you say Shiv doesn't get an all-time team?
Nah.
Yeah. Where would you put Shiv though? Where would you put Shiv, Mash?
I don't. That said, okay, fair enough. I haven't made my team.
Let's go down the names, because obviously the openers will be, because if we picking a team, a cricket team, you pick the two openers. So those are two batter spots that are gone. So he's not there. Then when you look, you have Viv, you have Richards, you have Lara, and you have George Headley in my books.
Yeah, George
Headley.
Of course. Yeah.
In the all-time where he was a great player before the war. So those four, so that right there you have the six batters. So where Shiv is gonna go? Right?
Hold on. Your point is
Hold on.
The thing is, your point is correct, but I'm trying to find the way.
What's the headline we're going with here? Jamaican Mash, trying to ditch George Headley for Shivnarine Chanderpaul.
No, do you know what I was about to say? I was about to say that one of Viv or Lara has to go for Shiv. I don't care which one. One's got to go for Shiv.
and it's funny. I remember Ian Chappell when Lara, his last tour to Australia, we made that double century, and Chappell was lauding about, the thing that amazes him about Lara, even at that age, at 35, that he still had the hunger to score runs, big innings, doubles, because as Chappell was saying, when you start to get to those ages, you're not interested in batting that long, right? And he went, and Chappell said, in that same commentary, he said, in his opinion, these were the three best West Indian players he's played against and seen. Sobers 1, Richards 2, and Lara 3. So then when you add Headley, sorry, Shiv.
Yeah, I'm gonna go away and look at this again. Come back.
And then remember, you're gonna have some people gonna argue for the three W's, Sir Everton or Sir Clyde, also to be in the mix, right? So, maybe what we need to do is also have a second West Indies.
Yeah, we'd have to have a second 11.
I think the second team would be more interesting debate, more so than the first team, because the first team almost picks itself, but the second team is where you're gonna have a lot of pushing and moving around. That to me is a more interesting debate.
So just to check though, Basil, who in your greatest team, who are your three bowlers? So obviously Gibbs is your spinner, but who's your three quicks?
Yeah, I got Andy Roberts, Malcolm Marshall, and Ambrose. Those are the three quicks.
Okay.
And then remember, Sobers would be the fourth seamer, because you remember he bowled seam, and Gibbs brings up as the fifth bowler, and then you have obviously got to pick a wicket keeper.
Let's just on that topic, Basil. So obviously, if we were doing this about Barbados or Jamaica, a lot of the conversation would be on the fast bowlers. You can clearly see from this Guyana list, there's not many. There was only Colin Croft really. Is it just specifically down to the weather and the pitches in Guyana as to why we see a lack of world-class fast bowlers, or from your experience, are there other reasons why we're not producing them?
No, I think the problem is this. Guyana has had a history of not giving our fast bowlers enough opportunities from youth level and in the senior level. If you go back and look at Guyana playing first-class cricket, for example, you would see the fast bowlers bowl these minimum amount of overs, and then the bulk of the bowlers is the spinners. You know, so guys didn't get, because we had a lot of talented fast bowlers, but they just didn't get the opportunities like their peers across the region to bowl enough to get wickets. So as a result, even when you go to the youth cricket under 19, the same nonsense happened. So guys didn't get the same. Look, I'll give you an example. I'll give you an easy example. My friend Ray Joseph in 1984 in Jamaica, in the first inning, took 6 wickets. In the second inning, the Guyanese captain, Timur Mohammed, opened the bowling with 2 spinners. Now, where on earth would you think something like that would happen? Else, the only country that would do that is Guyana. This guy takes 6 in the first innings, but you throw the ball to 2 spinners to start the second inning, right? I remember my other friend, Lyndon Fraser, was the other fast bowler. He was making, that was the one game he played. And I remember he's telling me the story. He said he and Josie, we warmed up and everything. Next thing you know, Timur throws the ball to Clyde Butts. That would be the most demoralizing thing for you as a fast bowler.
Yeah.
You know?
So Santokie, I guess. Well, no, hold on. So you and Basil both mentioned Kanhai and Lloyd. So I'm sticking to what I said. Shiv is the greatest Guyanese cricketer of all time.
Right. On.
I fully accept that lots of people disagree with that. But you and Basil said Rowan Kanhai and Clive Lloyd. So you have both of you have to pick one. You can't hedge your bets on 2. So
let me put everything in context. I'm gonna use this on a basketball analogy. LeBron James has the greatest NBA basketball career, but he is not the greatest player. Michael Jordan is. Shiv has the greatest career as a Guyanese cricketer, but he is not the greatest Guyanese cricketer. So that's the context.
And I'll accept. I'll accept that argument. I will accept.
Right.
Accept that argument.
So Clive Lloyd for me is the greatest Guyanese cricketer.
Santokie.
Yeah, I'm similar sentiments. I think in 20, 30 years, when we're talking about our memories of West Indies cricket, not many people are going to say, "Oh, remember Shivnarine Chanderpaul? He made me feel like this. We know he done a good job. He got it away and got the runs, but he didn't evoke the same emotions that a lot of other batters did." For me, my son Jackson was born in October. His middle name is Rohan. So I have to go. There's only one reason for that.
Was that the reason? Hold on. Was that the reason you chose Rohan?
Yeah.
Well, there you go. There you go. The cultural legacy is strong. Listen.
The reason, as I said, I say Clive is the greatest because of what he did as a captain and the legacy in terms of that. But if we're looking at pure batter, Kanhai is the greatest Guyanese batter.
Well, people, I know people have enjoyed this one. Whether you watch this 3 different installments or all in one go, let us know in your comments below. As Basil said at the top of the show, this is the type of topic that every territory has it for their own set of players. This is just the Guyanese version.
A Guyanese version.
but for those listening, you don't have to be Guyanese to answer this question, because it's just as important to people like myself who come from another nation island in the region who have favorite cricketers from somewhere else in the territory. So if you're not Guyanese, who is your favorite Guyanese cricketer of all time? If you are Guyanese, who do you agree with? I've said Shiv, Santokie said Rohan, and Basil said Clive. Who is the greatest Guyanese West Indian cricketer of all time? Please let us know in the comments below. And as ever, like, share, subscribe. If you don't know by now, you can find Basil Butcher anywhere there's cricket about the West Indies. You can find Basil Butcher. So if this is the first time you're watching the Caribbean Cricket Podcast episode and you've never come across Basil Butcher Jr. before, you can find him everywhere. Mason and Guess, Cricket Forum, Cricket 101. I think that's what it's called.
Cricket 101.
So you can find Basil as a really imperative, important talking head across our region. And what I've always loved about you, Basil, if I just give you your flowers for a second, is it's important to have people like you on these shows, because if we don't, we're in danger, West Indies cricket, of losing our
historical
heritage, our cricketing heritage and our history and the culture and weaving the tapestry of our cricket all together to understand and it might sound ridiculous to you two, given this is a Guyana special, but 20-30 years from now, people might not remember the importance of a Rohan Kanhai or whatever it might be.
They don't talk about it.
It's important to paint the context and the heritage and the history for people to understand why these cricketers were so important in West Indian cricket.
I got one for you, Mash, for your island. You got they're two batters. They didn't play much for the West Indies, but they got to go down as two of the greatest Jamaican batters, Mac Morris and Maurice Foster.
Do you know what? People always say that to me. They always say that.
West Indies, but boy, they made a boatload of runs in regional cricket.
So listen, we're gonna do a Jamaica one. I know which island's gonna cause the most debate. It's gonna be Barbados. That's the one
that's the sweetest one. That is the sweetest one. They got so many to pick from.
but Basil, thank you so much for coming on the show. Much appreciated. Thank you. Hope to see you on very, very soon again.
Yes, sir.
All right then, no problem. Ladies and gents, Santokie, I'll give you the last words. That was a really good episode. Let's see how people respond in the comments below. Last words to you, Santokie.
Yeah, I think that was a really good episode. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone. If three of us couldn't agree on one player, everyone's going to have their own opinion. I think it goes back to what you've always said, Mash. If we don't tell our own story, our own history, and you let other people do, you'll never get the honest and correct version. It's all about sort of weaving that tapestry. Caribbean Cricket Podcast, by the fans, for the fans. We're not just talking about current day issues. We know our history, we know the legacy, and we're trying to merge that all together. So this was a real enjoyable episode to do. And as you said, Mash, we'll be looking to do it for all the other different territories and kind of have those debates going forward. So thank you very much. We got more content coming soon, more guests coming on. The content plan is hitting for 2025. We've been consistent. Like, share, subscribe, follow us on Instagram, X, TikTok, Blue Sky, Facebook. Most importantly, if you can support us, any little donation helps. Patreon.com/Carib Cricket. We got the tour. West Indies' next tour is going to be in Ireland and England. So we're going to be there. We're looking to do as much content as possible, and we can only do that with your help by following the Patreon link and donating. Whatever little you can will help us, and will all be invested back into the product. So wherever you're listening to this in the world, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We hope you have a good day, and make sure you comment with your opinion. Who is Guyana's greatest cricketer? And we'll see you very soon.
Peace.
West Indies Cricket, Caribbean Cricket Podcast. West Indies Cricket, Caribbean Cricket Podcast.